Welcome to this explainer. Okay, let's just dive right into an absolute game changer from the 1980s that completely reimagined the beautiful game. We're talking about the exact moment football evolved from a brutal, muddy, physical battle into a highly intellectual chess match played on grass. It is literally the story of how pure geometry conquered raw strength.
You see, for decades prior, football was kind of trapped in this super rigid binary. On one extreme, you had the brute force physicalism of the English model, a game of pure grit, crunching tackles, and just getting stuck in. On the other extreme, you had the deep, impenetrable defensive bunkers of Italian catenaccio, where strict man marking and totally nullifying the opponent was the ultimate goal. The sport across Europe was incredibly structured, deeply physical, and, frankly, profoundly rigid.
To understand exactly how the sport escaped this rigid era, we're going to deconstruct this new blueprint piece by piece. We'll look at the quiet revolution, the anatomy of the square, its tactical lethality, the ideological war of force versus intelligence, and finally, its modern legacy.
All right, Section 1, the quiet revolution, a shift in the center.
Here was the massive problem of the era. Players were just getting way too athletic. We went from a time where players might cover just a few miles a match to sudden leaps in sports science turning everyone into absolute marathon runners. The sheer physical onslaught was becoming way too intense. So traditional tactics simply weren't cutting it anymore. If you couldn't rely solely on outrunning the other team for 90 minutes, you had to find a way to outthink them. Basically, you had to let the ball do the running. And the intellectual solution to this? The magic square. Instead of lining up in these predictable straight rows that were super easy to mark, visionary managers started clustering 4 highly technical, creative midfielders into a compact diamond shape right in the middle of the pitch. By doing this, they didn't just take up space, they created a literal possession vacuum. They'd suck the opposition out of their comfortable defensive blocks, and the second a defender stepped out to press, this clustered group used lightning-fast one-touch passing to thread the ball through gaps that simply hadn't existed a second prior. They stopped trying to win physical fights and started controlling the geometry of the match itself.
Moving on to Section 2, Anatomy of the Square, Deconstructing the Machine.
Perfected by Michel Hidalgo's legendary French national team, the crucial point here is treating these players not just as independent athletes, but as perfectly calibrated gears inside an engine. At the tip of the diamond, you had the orchestrator, the peerless Michel Platini, acting as the creative catalyst to dictate the exact tempo. Right behind him, the engine room, Jean Tigana and Alain Giresse, acted as the vital connective tissue relentlessly bridging defense and attack. And sitting at the base, you had the anchor, players like Bernard Jonheny or Luis Fernandez, providing the essential structural stability. Every single player had a specific geometric purpose.
But here's the real genius. It wasn't static. It wasn't never just spots glued to a chalkboard. It was a fluid, constantly shifting organism. The engine room was always moving, dropping deep, then pushing wide. This constant rotation forced opposing defenders into impossible, split-second choices. Do I step up and leave a massive gap? Do I hold back and let the orchestrator pick me apart? The architectural soundness of this movement made the formation an absolute nightmare to break down.
Which brings us to Section 3, Tactical Lethality, Inducing Systemic Failure.
Now, you might be wondering, how exactly did this elegant shape actually destroy those gritty 1980s defenses? Because look, passing the ball beautifully is one thing. Inducing total systemic failure in a highly drilled opponent is an entirely different beast.
Well, it breaks down into a beautifully simple 3-step sequence of spatial manipulation. Step 1. Overload the central channel with 4 incredible playmakers, vastly outnumbering the opposition. Step 2. The opposing manager panics, sees the center being overrun, and forces his defensive lines to narrow to protect the goal. Step 3. The trap is sprung. Because the opponent has narrowed their defense, the flanks are left completely, hopelessly exposed, allowing attacking fullbacks to just sprint up and ruthlessly exploit that massive wide space.
It was the ultimate pick-your-poison trap, a total lose-lose scenario for the defense. If you widen your defensive block to stop those overlapping fullbacks, Platini carves you wide open right down the middle with a devastating pass. But if you protect the center and stay narrow, you get absolutely killed on the wings. The magic square completely took the decision-making power away from the opponent. You basically just had to choose how you wanted to lose.
And the ultimate prize in all this? The half space. Way before it became a trendy modern coaching buzzword, this era was the birth of mastering that exact 10 yards of space between the opposing midfield and their defensive line.
This incredibly dangerous pocket turned the pitch from a battlefield of raw emotion into a zone of cold, calculated logic.
Section 4. Force versus intelligence. The ideological war.
Now, over in the UK, this whole geometry idea was initially met with a lot of heavy skepticism. Traditionalists strongly favored the physics of force, two rigid banks of four, steel, muscle, crunching tackles. When teams like France or Zico's breathtaking Brazil rolled out the midfield diamond, they were mercilessly mocked for being too soft. But what we were really witnessing was a massive ideological war, the muscle of traditional football fiercely clashing against the mind and fluidity of this new geometry of intelligence.
But there's this incredibly profound truth that emerged to shut the critics right up. You don't need to tackle a player if you never give him the ball, period. This system achieved a level of brutal efficiency that basically rendered traditional tackling totally obsolete. The ball always moves faster than any human can run. If you just hoard possession through constant passing triangles, the opponent's raw physical strength literally doesn't matter. You cannot tackle a shadow. It's that simple.
So, Section 5, the modern legacy, ghosts of the 1980s. Why does any of this matter today?
Well, if we follow the timeline, the core objective actually never vanished. What those players and managers felt intuitively on the pitch in the 80s, modern supercomputers and granular data analytics mathematically proved in the 2010s. It pushed straight through the data revolution into the tactical dominance we see in 2026, with elite managers like Pep Guardiola or the modern Spanish national side. The fitness level skyrocketed, but the goal of dominating space remained exactly the same. Just listen to commentators today when they endlessly talk about inverted fullbacks or the box midfield used by clubs like Manchester City to create numerical advantages. You are quite literally watching the evolved ghosts of the 1980s Magic Square. It's the exact same tactical obsession, just wearing a modern disguise. Flood the center, dictate the rhythm, and relentlessly manipulate the defensive structure until it cracks.
The 80s taught us a permanent foundational lesson about football. Tactical trends are never truly gone. They're just refined by new generations. The goal is always to shape the opponent until they break, and once they break, mercilessly control the space that remains.
Ultimately, the Magic Square proved that the absolute most dangerous weapon on the pitch isn't raw explosive pace, and it isn't pure physical strength. It's geometry. So the next time you sit down to watch a match, ask yourself, what are you really seeing out there? Are you just watching athletes run? Or are you seeing a brilliant series of connected shapes pulling the strings? Thanks for joining me on this explainer. Keep looking for those shapes, and I'll catch you next time.